So you can see again, the character starts out facing the scene, and if we want to move the character back, have him start back further, we can. Or if we find that we want to kind of start him over a little bit too much to the side, we can do that as well. What you want to avoid doing is rotating the character, because if you rotate the character and it's not on 90 degrees, like it's not facing directly down an axis, then you're going to run into issues as the character's walking at an angle, and it's going to make things much more difficult for how you track your curve progression and how you actually move the character through space, because the character's facing an angle then. So this is why the scenes should be already set up. Once you import the scenes into your character file, they should be set up so the character can walk straight forward down an axis, not have to worry about rotating him to get him facing the direction to interact with the objects in the scene. Now before we start animating, let's make sure that we can only grab the things that we really need to be able to grab in our scene. In our window under Show, we want to make sure that NURBS curves, NURBS surfaces, vehicles, polygons, those are all fine to turn on. The things you really want to make sure that are turned off are going to be joints and IK handles, because these are things that are inside the rig. If you leave these on, if they're showing, you may accidentally grab them. You never want to be able to grab those objects inside the rig, because you risk breaking the rig then. So always make sure that joints and IK handles are checked off before you start animating. They should never be checked on, because you run really high risk of breaking something in the rig and possibly even having to redo whole chunks of animation going back to a previous save if those things do get broken. I'm also going to be turning off our grid. Here I want to make sure the same thing. Grid is turned off. Again, joints, IK handles also turned off. And since this is the camera shot, I'm turning off the NURBS curve so I can just see a clear image of my pose without the curves getting in the way. I'm going to come up here to all of our masking options, and I'm only going to want to select our NURBS curves. In some cases, you may find places where you want to be able to select geometry for interacting with some certain props or anything like that. But for the most part, most of your props should have a NURBS curve so you can easily manipulate them. So I'm going to be turning off all these things such as the joints and components and so forth, so that only the NURBS curves can be selected, the curve objects. So now I'm not even at a risk of being able to select anything within the rig or in the background and so forth. Let's check a few of our preferences. The button to the right here is going to be our animation preferences. Now obviously we can get to that by pushing this button, or we can just come up to Window, Settings and Preferences, and Preferences. That will also bring this window up. Now here's where it's going to start by default on the time slider. So let's handle this and then go through a few of the other options you may want to pay attention to. For the time slider, things we want to pay attention to are Update View, Active, and All. So by default, your animation is only going to play through in the active window. So to show you what that is like, let's set a few keyframes for this. Okay, so I've put a few poses in for the animation. So let's minimize this, and as I scrub through, you can see as I'm scrubbing through the timeline, this only plays in this window as my last active window, the last one I have selected. You can see by the little gray border around it. And as soon as I let go of the mouse, this window just popped into place. So you can see the poses, the character walking forward here, playing through, but then as soon as I stop, this one pops. If I come over here and select into this window, you can see the gray border moves around here now, and now I can start seeing the animation play this way. And it's the same thing if I hit the actual play button. It's going to play in that last active window, and the other one doesn't update until I actually stop playing. This is what the update view does. So if I click this on all instead, now it's going to play through in all of my windows. So instead of just playing through the last active window, it's going to play through in each of them. Now this is usually works fairly fine for most computer setups, unless your computer's really been bogged down by slow processing speed or has a lot of other things going on in it. Playing back in both of your windows shouldn't be an issue. This allows you to actually see in real time what's going on in the window that you're animating in and in your actual camera shot, as opposed to having to click back and forth between each of them. So this is what I would recommend having your preferences set to, so that you can actually see the motion in both of these windows. Now, this won't give you a true sense of all your timing, because again, unless you have a more powerful system, then it may be able to keep up and everything. But the more things you have going on, more stuff you have blocking on your system, it's obviously going to slow this down by having to play through in both of these windows. So it could end up skipping frames and things like that. So just be aware of that, because that's going to bring us to our next option, which is our playback speed. By default, this is set to play every frame. Play every frame is going to literally play each frame as fast as the processor can handle it. So if you have a very heavy scene, it's going to be much slower than if you have a scene that doesn't really have a lot of calculations to take into account, such as less backgrounds, lighter resolution character, keeping the character in low res, and so forth. So if the character's in low res, the background is very sparse, not a very complicated rig, then it's going to play back very fast. It's going to play back faster than it actually would normally play back. If your scene is very heavy, it's going to slow down immensely, because it's going to still show you every frame, and it's not really concerned with the actual timing of your scene. So it's going to play back very slowly. Now this will be something you use outside of normal animation purposes. This will be something like for dynamics and things like that, because playing back with play every frame will also prevent sound from working correctly. It'll prevent you from being able to scrub through your sound. It will play back in real time when you hit the play button, but when you scrub through, you won't be able to hear any sound there. So we're going to be working at real time 24 frames a second. This is going to play back your scene at real time, or as close to it as possible. The thing is, to do that, it will skip frames if it needs to. So if you have a moderately dense scene or anything like that, it's going to skip frames so it can try to keep up with keeping 24 frames a second. This will allow it to scrub through sound as well, but again, you're not getting a truest sense of your timing. This is why we're going to be play blasting often, is because neither of these options are foolproof, but the better option is playing at real time 24 frames a second, because it's going to give us a closer approximation to what our timing of our scene is, as opposed to trying to simply play something back as fast as possible. So while you may lose some poses, it's at least giving you a closer sense of your timing, and it also allows you to animate with sound. So we'll be sticking with animating at real time 24 frames a second here. Now, probably don't want to set your queue size to infinite. That's a bit overkill, but definitely want to set it higher than 50, because every little thing you do in animation is tracked. So whether you move in the graph editor, move around in the timeline, and whatnot, or if you select and deselect off of something, you move something a little bit here and there, all those little things are tracked, and they quickly add up to get more than 50. So I'd recommend just adding a 0 on there. 500 should be fine. If you need to go back more than 500 times, probably should go ahead and open up a previous scene. 500 should be enough of a queue size that you can undo a lot of your issues if you get to a point where something didn't quite work the way you thought it was going to. And finally, come up here to animation. What we want to right here is all of our scenes, we're going to start by blocking them out in steps. That's going to be a course requirement. So you're going to be animating in stepped until you get to the final finessing phase. So to ensure that all the keys that we create are going to be in step when we create them, we're going to set our default out tangent. This is going to determine how the curves interpolate once they leave a key. And we're going to set the default out tangent to stepped. We're only worried about the default out tangent. We can't change the default in tangent to step, because stepped is simply going to keep the same value of the key until the key changes value. So the default intangent, we can leave it auto because it isn't really affected in this case. It's all about the default out tangent, how the animation leaves that key. So that's going to be in step, so it keeps that same value until the key changes. Now when I actually use my mail button, it's going to automatically make that key in stepped. If I didn't have that, it would have made the key in auto. And lastly, we're going to go over some basic timeline and graph editor manipulation. These shortcuts are things you're really going to get used to the more you animate in Maya and should become part of your toolbox. The most common is going to be using period and comma keys. With any object selected that has keys on it, you can use period and comma to step forward and step back by one key. So if I use the period key, it's going to step forward one key for the object that I have selected. If I use the comma key, it steps backwards one key. So this is highly effective for being able to flip through our animation and check our poses quickly this way. Instead of scrubbing through with our mouse, we can just flip back and forth on the keyboard and check our poses back to back like this. Alternatively, if we use Alt with period and comma or Option period and comma, we can move by frame. So this becomes more useful when you are out of step and have begun finessing, so you're looking at Maya's in-betweens. So when you start looking at those in-betweens, then you can start looking at it frame by frame and checking what's actually happening on the movement that Maya's putting in there by splining. Now if we need to zoom in our graph editor, one way we can get closer to our keys is obviously to select them and to hit F to frame them. That's completely fine. But if you need to actually have a little bit more control, you can do that by holding down Alt or Option, Shift, and right mouse button. This allows you to scale along one axis, so you can make the graph editor wider or you can make it longer.